Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video. Today's going to be all about snare drums. I'm going to show you how I layered 3 snare drums to get a really congruent, glued sound. Something that sounds to the listener as just a regular snare drum, but we take different components that we like from different snares, combining them all. So this comes really useful if there's like a clap you like, but you like the body of a snare. Maybe there's a really mono snare that needs more width, so you could grab a wide snare as well. So why be limited to just processing? And you don't have to keep throwing on tons of stereo enhancer and this and this and this. What you can do instead is do what we did in this video, which is taking different snare drums and combining them. So here I'll play back a little teaser of this song I'm working on. Now you don't have to do this. You can by all means grab a sample that you love out of a pack. If that snare drum meets all your requirements and it's great, work with it. But this comes as an alternate method and definitely is great if you're looking to try something new. So what I did here was that I started with a mono snare. We'll turn off the bus processing. They're all being routed, a pre-delayed snare, a wide snare, and a mono snare. They're being routed to this send 3. And so the mono snare, I'm going to turn off the EQ, sounds like this. So I first started with the mono snare. The mono snare had a really nice body, but it lacked a lot of width. And so I threw on an EQ on there. I basically took out all the wide information using this mid-side EQ here. And this is cutting off anything below 196. And this is removing that low end for both the mid and the side. But to take things further, I also put a high shelf EQ like this that is taking away the information from the high end of the side channel, because with it off sounds like this. And now on. So it's subtle. It shouldn't be a big difference, but it did have an impact. And I needed to then move on and be like, okay, how can I add something wide to this? So I found a wide snare, and the wide snare we have here, so that'll be soloed. So it's like a clap. We have a wide clap here, and I thought, you know what? Let's just use only the wide information and remove the mid information. So just how I swept away this stuff here, the side information, with the clap, I removed the information from all the mid. So there's just side information from that. So this is what it sounds like. And with the processing on, it's very subtle. You just have that kind of like high-end crisp cutting through. And this is complementing that mono snare because we've now carved out space so that it doesn't add up. So that's a way that you can definitely do it. Mid-side EQ is your friend if you're going to be layering snare drums. Of course, you could delay things a bit. You could shuffle things a bit ahead or behind. But this is just going to be strictly on EQ. To wrap things up, I added this pre-snare. So the pre-snare is like this electro snare, kind of your typical electro house type of snare drum. And it sounds great on its own. This is the snare. I really liked the sound, and this is the most prominent sound in this kind of trilogy of sounds. But when I was stacking those sounds, there was a bit too much fighting going on for that high end. So here I'm not doing mid-side. I'm just ducking down a little bit of that high-end crisp and rolling off a little bit of those lows just to make it less kind of obnoxious during those high-end crisp and those lows, so it doesn't fight too much for space, but instead giving some mid and high-end crisp. And because it's a pre-delayed snare, of course, it'll be a bit more groovy. Now with those 3, with the mono removing the width, with the wide removing the mono, and with that pre-delay snare, they're all being routed to the snare mix. And the snare mix, I'll play this just dry. So it's not too bad, but real big tip here is going to be, of course, we're probably going to have maybe a little bit too much low end. Another key tip is that if you use a reverb, your reverb can take those 3 snare drums and put them in the same room. They will psychologically appear to be, they'll audibly seem to be in the same room. So when that listener hears it, it sounds like it's one snare drum. It sounds like it's one component. And so what I started with was a kind of a harsh EQ I just used the preset here, the mastering, and then I kind of put it up to 20 kilohertz, and this was at 150, just to remove some subsonic frequencies. Next, I used this, which I haven't used this in a long time, but I'm going to come back to this, the RC48, which is a fantastic reverb. And I used a classic hall preset, small hall. I didn't want it to be too small, but I wanted a little bit of a tail to it with the wetness at 20%, and I brought down the bass so that it's more of that mid and high frequencies. So with those on, it'll sound like this. So adding a little bit of wetness. Later on, I realized that there was a bit of fighting going on with the kick, with the other components, and a word of advice here is that when you're working with snare drums, it's always situational. There doesn't have to be a point where your snare drum is hitting this specific level or your snare drum needs to hit this hard. Sometimes some genres, the snare is more in the back of the mix. Sometimes you might make a track with no snare drum. So, it really depends on what you're doing, and you don't have to exactly copy what I'm doing here, but it's really about the psychology, the philosophy of going into this, taking different elements, cutting out different stuff so that they don't add up, and they each complement each other. They have their own space in the mix. So this was really more of when I was listening to stuff, I was realizing it was fighting, because it's good to listen EQ on things on their own, but it's also important to listen as a whole with everything not soloed, because even if you get something sounding great on its own, it matters how it sounds in the mix, not just solo. And then to wrap things up was the OTT. So let's play this. The OTT just gave a little final crisp. And that OTT, I left the time at the default, the depth at 6%, and the upwards and downwards at 31%. So when I work with OTT, I recommend you guys do the same thing. I mean, it's free, so absolutely try it out. Make sure you add it to your arsenal. Work with OTT very slowly. Usually what I'll do is that I'll back it down and I'll slowly go up 1, 2, 3%, 5, 6%. And though you can see these numbers kick in terms of how they're compressing, it's important that you listen for when that compression kicks in and it's really polishing your sound. Because of course, if it's too extreme, the signal is going to be way too squashed like this. I just wanted something subtle. I didn't want it to be too powerful, too noticeable. And if you don't want to do upwards compression where you're adding a bit more harmonics, you could of course turn off this value down to 0. I could probably have left these at the default value, but I usually like backing these down to like 50% and be a bit more conservative. So your mileage may vary. You could leave these at 100 and everything at default and tweak it however you like. But this was just for me like kind of a little final polish. And when we turn these guys off, this is with it off. Now this is with the both EQs, the reverb and the OTT. So it just gives like a final polish, puts it in its own room, and takes those elements. And this is a method that I hope can help you guys out in terms of maybe getting a bit more creative with your percussion, taking your snare drums. And this is definitely going to help you guys too, taking like snare drums from common sample packs and making it kind of your own, kind of adding your own flair to those snare drums, to those drums. And you don't have to do this if you're satisfied with the snare drum in the Vengeance pack, in the Black Octopus, Cymatics, whatever you're working with, by all means. But this is definitely going to be an alternate way to get a bit more mileage out of those same samples and work a bit more creatively. So I hope you guys like this. And I just wanted to show you what I was working with on this track. I apologize for the delay, guys. There's been a lot of stuff going on in the real world, in the life world. And the beard, of course, has been cut. But the beard will come back. Don't get too obsessed with your beard and your hair. It always grows back. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, if you found it useful, remember to smash that like button. Make sure you guys are subscribed, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.